Before Mortal Kombat, before Grand Theft Auto, before Night Trap and Carmageddon and JFK Reloaded, there was the 1980s. Yes, the graphics weren't as good, but people's minds were still pretty twisted. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 7 of the most controversial games of the 1980s, and talk about specifically why they were so controversial. Now, if you've seen videos like this before, you probably think it's going to be all violence and gore. There is no doubt that some of these videos get nasty. However, that's not entirely what I'm going for here. Some of these games were violent, but others were super controversial, exposed kids to illicit substances, or in one case, even impacted the geopolitical scene by serving as a nuclear war simulator. Let's start there. Nuclear war. It's certainly a popular topic in entertainment, but even in the 80s it stirred up some controversy. That was certainly the case for the 1985 game Raid Over Moscow. This game, made by Access Software and available on the Commodore 64 and other computer systems, held you responsible for the protection of the United States after a Soviet nuclear attack against America. So let's be clear, the nuclear war thing, just a plot device. The game wasn't trying to make a political statement. Instead, it was trying to use war for profit. There are 3 stages in the game, and the basic goal is to blow Russian things and soldiers up. It's pretty standard fare. The reviews were relatively positive. As you can see, considering the time period, the gameplay was varied, and the graphics were pretty sharp. Of course, this was the 80s, and discussing the Cold War was controversial, to say the least. At the time of the game's launch in 1984, the Cold War had come dangerously close to being too hot, with 2 military exercises, Operation Ryan and Able Archer 83, as well as the shooting down of Korean Airlines Flight 007, straining Soviet relations with the United States. Indeed, for many, especially those who lived close to the Soviet Union, the threat of the Cold War turning hot was a bit too real. The game touched a nerve. Computer and Video Games magazine fielded several angry letters from individuals who questioned if the subject was truly appropriate for a game, and that was just the start of it. The game also made it onto quite a few warning or banned lists. In East Germany, the Stasi, or Ministry for State Security, described the game as having a, quote, particularly militaristic and inhumane nature. In West Germany, the game was added to the index of media harmful to young persons. Things got even weirder in Finland, a country which was heavily under Soviet influence at the time. In March of 1984, Soviet officials formally presented Finland with a petition that asked for the ban of many forms of media, including Raid Over Moscow. The Minister of Trade was forced, in Parliament, to say that the game couldn't be banned under Finnish laws. The country's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Paavo Väyrynen, was eventually forced to respond, apologize for the negative interpretations, and assure the Soviets that Finland still maintained a friendly attitude towards the Soviet Union. It's rare, thankfully, that a game winds up getting between foreign governments, but Raid Over Moscow found a way. As we all know, legal issues often spout up during the course of video game publishing. Sometimes those issues get interesting. Like when one company tries to sue another over an entire sport. The game in question is International Karate, which was also published under World Championship Karate. The game was published by Epyx between 1985 and 1986 for the ZX Spectrum and other home computers. This game features players participating in a martial arts tournament, where the goal is to score solid hits against an opponent rather than kill bad guys or rescue a princess. As an international game, players played across the world, with backdrops changing as players advanced. The issue? There were extensive similarities between this game and the 1984 game Karate Champ, published by Data East in 1984. In that game, players participate in a tournament where the goal is to score points off of an increasingly difficult opponent. The background changes. Sound familiar? Data East took Epyx to court, where Data East alleged that Epyx had violated both trademark and copyright. In the initial ruling, Data East won, with the court ruling that Epyx had violated Data East's copyright. The court found that there were cosmetic differences between the game, but ruled that the games were basically the same. As a result, an injunction was placed on the sales of World Championship Karate, and Epyx was ordered to recall all existing versions. However, that wasn't the last word. Epyx appealed to the United States Court of Appeals, and on this one, they won. In his decision, Judge Stephen Trott wrote that the, quote, idea and its expression, meaning the sport and the way that programmers created the game, are fundamentally inseparable. As a result, Data East had no valid claim about trademark infringement. The injunction was lifted, and the game could be sold again. Speaking of lawsuits, let's talk about the Race Against Time, which can be categorized with one succinct word. Oops. The Race Against Time was a pretty cool game with really good intentions. It was developed in 1988 by Codemasters, see our Game Genie video for more on them, and released on the Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum. The game's proceeds were all to be donated to Sport Aid, a 1980s charity that raised money for famine relief in Africa. In the game, you play as Omar Khalifa, a Sudanese runner. The game is a side-scroller. Your job is to raise a flag and light a torch bowl by running across the world, avoiding obstacles and hazards, while also ensuring that you don't run out of time. The end goal is to get to the United Nations in New York City, formally kicking off Sport Aid 1988. However, slight problem. No one at Codemasters actually asked for permission to use Owens' picture or likeness on the cover. Owens himself had died in 1980, and for whatever reason, it never dawned on Codemasters that you can't really use someone's picture in marketing without their permission. Codemasters reached out to Owens' estate to try to get their permission retroactively, but they declined. As a result, Codemasters was forced to recall all copies of the game and change marketing materials. That could not have been cheap. Fortunately, American runner Carl Lewis offered his likeness for free, likely sensing a solid promotional opportunity, not that I blame him one bit. As a result, new versions of the game featured Lewis. Unfortunately, this was just one of many disasters for the Race Against Time, which failed to raise its projected goal of £1 million, instead barely selling more than 25,000 copies. From the well-intended but poorly executed to this. Let's talk Chiller, which from a blood and gore perspective wins the title of most controversial. As you can see, Chiller is just over-the-top blood and gore, and it was more or less designed to shock. The plot, honestly, there's no plot. You just torture people. There are 4 levels in the game, and the levels have such innovative titles like Torture Chamber and Rack Room. You can use medieval torture devices, shoot victims, all that good stuff. All of this could be done through the use of a zapper gun or a standard controller. The game was released for arcades in 1986 by developer Exidy, who created a variety of other controversial games, including Death Race, which was one of the first games to attract significant attention for its controversial material. Death Race earned national publicity, and that publicity helped push the sales of the game further. According to Vic Tolmay, one of the developers of Chiller, developers were told to, quote, be absolutely crazy, end quote, and design a game that was meant to generate controversy. Unfortunately for Exidy, that didn't happen for Chiller. Sales of the game never really took off in America because it was just too much. As noted by Stephen Kent, author of The Ultimate History of Video Games, the game sold much better in third world countries, where there was less self-policing by arcade owners. Furthermore, there was an unlicensed Nintendo version of the game. Hilariously enough, there's text at the beginning of the game that says that the people you are torturing are evil, and they deserve the torture that you are providing. Right. That was gross. Let's move on to something better, like cigarette ads targeted at children. Super Monaco GP was a racing game developed by Sega that came out in 1989. The game was eventually ported to an array of computer systems and the Genesis. It also caused a lawsuit. The game parodied an array of brands, including Ford, Honda, and BP, and it did so by changing the name slightly and copying the style of the brand for in-game advertisements. But Sega crossed the line with one ad, Marlboro. Marlboro, of course, is the famous cigarette brand owned by Philip Morris. And that's where things got interesting. Even in the late 1980s, there were pretty strict controls about advertising cigarette products to kids, and seeing how kids played this game, there were issues. Dr. John Richards, a professor at the Medical College of Georgia, filed a complaint with the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, arguing that the game was advertising cigarettes to children. Then Philip Morris got involved, asking Sega to remove the ad from arcade machines. Sega released a conversion kit, but it wasn't enough, and many arcade owners didn't convert the game. As a result, Philip Morris sued Sega for trademark infringement, seeking a total game recall, monetary damages, and all advertising material destroyed. A year later, in 1992, the suit was settled. Sega offered $200 to arcade owners who replaced the chips and ran advertising encouraging them to do so. Not everyone was happy with the settlement. Dr. Richards, who had filed the initial complaint, called the settlement a hoax, saying that he felt it was a publicity stunt meant to get Philip Morris press. Let's talk about the most offensive game on the list, yes, worse than Chiller, Custer's Revenge. Custer's Revenge, marketed as Westward Ho in Europe, which is also terrible, was an Atari 2600 game published in 1982 by American Multiple Industries. The company itself would publish a variety of sexual and pornographic games. In Custer's Revenge, you play as General George Custer. For those of you who don't remember, Custer was a famous American general of the 19th century who was killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn by a variety of Native American troops. The goal of the game? You play as General Custer, and your job is to dodge arrows, reaching the end of a stage where you rape a Native American woman who's tied to a pole. I wish I was making that up. The game is as graphic as possible for Atari in 1982, complete with pixelated versions of male and female genitalia. There are different modes in the game that come with different features, including different obstacles to avoid. Like with other games, Custer's Revenge performed well as a result of the controversy surrounding it. Of course, it was universally condemned by anyone with a soul, including Native American and women's rights groups. Multiple Industries did try to claim that Custer was merely seducing the woman in question, despite the fact that she's literally tied up to a pole in the game cover, but whatever. Now, you may be asking yourself this question. How did Atari let this happen? And there's an answer. They didn't. Remember, this was 1982, before any video game company had developed a licensing or approval system. In fact, the lack of quality games ultimately helped crash the entire video game industry and is widely considered to be a huge cause of the 1983 video game crash. There are reports that Atari went as far as to sue American Multiple Industries for copyright infringement because the company apparently put Atari's logo on their game cartridges without permission. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any mention of the case, so if you know how that went, please let us know in the comments. Incidentally, one of the founders of American Multiple Industries, Stuart Curtin, said that the game actually ended American Multiple Industries, despite reports indicating that the game sold anywhere from 75,000 to 200,000 copies and made $13 million on its sale. The company closed down in January 1983, with Curtin saying, quote, "The publicity was just so negative, the company could not continue to operate in the video game industry." And finally, we conclude with Berserk, the one game on this list that got blamed for killing a person. No, not for inspiring murder or violence, for actually killing a person. Let's take a step back. Berserk is a shooter that premiered in 1980. It's a maze-based shooter. You control this green stickman guy over here who must escape the maze by shooting his way out. You could die if you were shot by the other robots, touch one of them, the usual stuff. The game has no time limit, but it does have Evil Otto. Evil Otto is this creepy smiley face that would chase you if you took too much time. You can't kill Evil Otto, and if he touches you, you're dead. Evil Otto was regarded as remarkably creepy for the time period. Furthermore, one of the things that makes Berserk so interesting is that it was one of the first arcade games to feature voice synthesis, a brand new process at the time. According to one source, it was also a very expensive one, costing as much as $1,000 per word. Few phrases were uttered, be it by Evil Otto or the game itself, under the right conditions. The game's creepy atmosphere, including Evil Otto, its use of technology, and its relatively revolutionary gameplay helped make the game a bestseller. It was fun and it was intense. How intense was it exactly? In 1982, 18-year-old Peter Bukowski was either playing the game or had just finished playing Berserk when he abruptly had a heart attack and died. A coroner's report found that Bukowski had scarring around his heart from years before the game, making it clear that the game itself had not killed him, something specifically noted by the coroner. It is possible that Bukowski's elevated heart rate came from the game itself and that playing the game might have contributed to his death. Weirdly enough, 2 other deaths have been reported at the same location from the same machine as the machine that killed Bukowski, Friar Tuck's Game Room in Calumet City, Illinois. However, the details on both of these deaths, one of which involved another supposed heart attack, and another of which may have involved a stabbing that was related to a dispute over Berserk, are much more difficult to prove. However, what is indisputable? The water tower in Calumet City is painted to look very, very similar to Evil Otto. So look, as you can see, controversy meant something pretty different in the 1980s. It often meant blood and gore, but a lot of times it was companies being stupid. Unfortunately, in some ways, video game developers and publishers learned an important lesson. Controversy sells. Of course, the video game controversies of the 1980s would pale in comparison to the video game controversies of the 90s. That's a story for another video. Speaking of, you made it to the end of this video, so I hope you liked it. If you did, please like and subscribe so you can keep seeing the content that you obviously enjoy. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day out there. We'll see you next time.